Hello everyone, welcome to the second episode of BridgeAusTV. In our first episode, I talked about working in Australia, and that is in the perspective of the visa applicant. In this episode, this would be a guide for the employers or the sponsors. As an employer, you might be thinking of sponsoring a current employee who is on a temporary visa. Her or his visa might be ending soon, but you can see potential in this employee, and then you wanted that person to continue to work for you. That's why you're looking for sponsorship options. Or it might be that you have really tried to get a local worker, Australian citizen, or Australian permanent resident, but you can't really get the right person for you, and therefore you wanted to hire someone from overseas. In this video, I will be covering the following: the sponsorship pathways for employers, the eligibility requirements, the employer sponsorship obligations, the application steps and costs, and the processing lead time. Sponsorship pathways. So there are two ways of sponsoring depending on the visa subclass that the nominee is applying for. The first one is the standard business sponsorship. If you have this, you can then sponsor under the TSS Temporary Skilled Shortage 482 visa, and also for the SESR 494 visa. That's the Skilled Employer Sponsored Regional 494 visa. So this visa was introduced on the 16th of November 2019. This is the replacement of the RSMS 187 visa. The second pathway is becoming an employer-nominated stream sponsor. So if you've become a sponsor for this, you'll be able to sponsor the nominees under the ENS 186 Direct Entry Visa or the ENS Transition Stream. So ENS stands for Employer Nominated Stream. Now, what are the eligibility requirements for these pathways? Well, there are different criteria for each visa subclass, but there are also common criteria. So I will start with the common criteria and then carry on with a specific requirement for each visa type. For the common requirements, the first thing there is that you should have a business that's legally and actively operating. So again, the requirement is about you, about your company, and about the nominated occupation. I have already discussed the requirements for the visa applicants on the first episode. You should also be able to show that you have the financial ability to sponsor your nominee. So this can be shown by your financial documents such as your profit and loss statements, your BAS statements, bank statements. These are some of the documents that we can provide to the Department of Home Affairs to justify that you have the financial capacity to sponsor a nominee. Now, the nominees, the people that you're sponsoring, they should have a salary of at least $53,900 per year. That's the minimum salary that you should be able to give to the nominee. The nominee salary should also be within the annual market salary rate. So what does that mean? Say, for example, you are trying to hire a programmer, and a programmer's average salary is about $60,000 or $70,000. If you provide a salary of just $53,900, and yes, you satisfy the minimum salary requirement, but you do not satisfy the annual market salary rate. So that means your application can be refused. There should be a genuine need for the nominated occupation. So, what does that mean? You should be able to show from your organizational chart that you need this role. For example, you're a hospital, of course, you need registered nurses. If you are a restaurant, of course, you'll need chefs. And take a note on this as well. I've covered this before in episode 1, but the role that you're offering should be in the skills occupation list. So, what does that mean? Every visa subclass, every kind for employer sponsored visas, they have an assigned list of all the occupations that can be sponsored by an employer. There should be no adverse information about your company that can have a negative effect in your application. The nominee's salary should not be less favorable compared to your Australian worker. What does that mean? Say, for example, you have a registered nurse who's currently working with you, the same role, registered nurse in the aged care facility. And that person is an Australian citizen or an Australian permanent resident, and that person's salary is, say, $65,000. Now you're hiring another nominee, a nominee who's on a temporary visa. You're trying to sponsor them, and if you're giving them a salary of, say, 60,000, that wouldn't work because the equivalent Australian citizen is already earning $65,000. So the nominee that you are hiring or sponsoring, their salary should not be less favorable than those people that you've already hired, who are Australian citizens or Australian permanent residents. The job should be a direct employment, meaning you are hiring the nominee directly, not hiring them and then have them hired by another company. It should be a direct contract between yourself and the nominee. The nominated occupation should be full-time, and the nominee would have to satisfy the requirements of that occupation. Work experience is also required for the nominated occupation. It can be 2 years or 3 years, depending on the visa subclass that you are applying for. So I'm now moving on to the specific requirements per visa subclass. For the TSS 482 visa, it is required that you do a labor market testing. What that means is that you should have already gone and tested the market if there are local workforce available for you. When I say local workforce, these are Australian citizens or Australian permanent residents in the same nominated role. Labor market testing can be done through putting out national ads about the occupation and providing reasons to the department why you were not able to find the right candidates for you. For the ENS nomination pathway, the additional requirements are you should be able to commit that you will be hiring the nominee for at least 2 years. And your business should be operating actively and legally in Australia. So, with the common requirements, I said that you should have a business that's legally operating, but because for the TSS 482 visa, you can be a business outside of Australia, but you can still sponsor a foreign worker in Australia. For the SESR 494 nomination, there are also additional requirements. You should have an approval from the regional certifying body. So that's RCB. Each state has that, and you should get an approval from them first before you can move ahead and go on and nominate an employee. The 494 visa subclass is for a regional sponsorship visa, and therefore your location, the work location, should be in a designated regional area. So we have here the link on where you can see the different postcodes in Australia which are considered as designated regional areas. You should also justify that the nominated occupation is likely to exist for 5 years. For the SESA 494, you also have to be approved standard business sponsor. Sponsorship obligations. As a sponsor, you have obligations to fulfill. There are different obligations per visa subclass, but I have just enlisted here some of them. First, the employee should stay in their nominated occupation, meaning if you hired them as a chemical engineer, they should stay as a chemical engineer. They cannot move to a different role. If they have to, then you'll have to apply for another nomination and you have to inform the Department of Home Affairs. You have the obligation to keep records about your employee, and also you are obliged to provide information when certain events occur. An example of an event is when you have let go of your employee or if there's a change of role. You should also not recover the costs of the sponsorship and nomination from your employee. Now, not all visa subclasses would have this, but definitely for the TSS 482, it is mandatory that employers or sponsors pay for the sponsorship and nomination costs of the application. You should not engage in discriminatory recruitment practices. You should also be paying for the costs incurred by the Commonwealth for locating and removing an unlawful non-citizen. What does this mean? So you've sponsored someone, and then suddenly that person just disappeared, maybe went to a different state, looked for another job, became illegal. Now, the Department of Home Affairs would locate this person and all the costs that they will incur in locating and removing that person will then be charged to you as a company. This is for the TSS 482 visa. All right, so now we're moving on to the steps of the application and the costs. I think this is what you all are waiting for. All right, so with the TSS 482 visa, there are 3 steps. One is the sponsorship. You need to become a standard business sponsor first. And then there's the nomination, and there's the visa application. Sponsorship costs $420. Nomination costs $330. Now, these are the costs that I've mentioned that should be borne by yourself as the employer and the sponsor. Now, the visa fees can be paid by the visa applicant. For the TSS 482, there are 2 different amounts of visa fees depending on their nominated occupation. If their occupation is in the medium to long-term skills list, MLTSSL, then the visa fee is $2,645. Now, if their nominated occupation is under the STSOL, short-term skill occupation list, then the visa fee is $1,265. As part of the nomination, you are also required to pay for the SAF levy. SAF means Skilling Australian Fund. Now, there are 2 amounts as well depending on your annual revenue. If your revenue is below $10 million a year, the SAF levy fee is $1,200 per year. So per year of sponsorship, you might be sponsoring someone for 4 years or 2 years. So you multiply that by the number of years. Now, if your revenue is 10 million and above, then the yearly SAF levy is $1,800. For the ENS 186, there are only 2 steps. There's the nomination application, which costs $540. And there is the visa application. So the visa application would have a fee for the primary applicant, and if your nominee is also bringing their family with them, their spouse or wife or children, then there's a separate fee for that. The visa application fee for the primary applicant is $4,045. The visa fee for the spouse or the de facto partner of the primary applicant is $2,025. For children under 18 years old, the visa fee is $1,010. For the SESR 494, there are many steps. So the first step is to get the sponsorship as a standard business sponsorship. So that's $420. And then you go on and get the RCB, Regional Certifying Body. The fee for the RCB would depend on the state where you are applying for. There's the nomination. 494 nomination is free. And there's the visa application. So visa application for SESR 494 is the same amount as the ENS visa application. So that's again, primary visa applicant is $4,045, $2,025 for the wife or the de facto partner of the primary applicant, and for children under 18 years old is $1,010. All right, so note that also for ENS and for the 494, SAF levy is also required. So ENS and SESR 494, it's only a one-off payment. For the TSS, it was a yearly fee. So if your annual revenue is 10 million and below, then the one-off fee for both SESR 494 and ENS 186 is $3,000. If your annual revenue is 10 million and above, then the SAF levy fee would be $5,000. It's a one-off fee as well. Processing lead time. This changes all the time, but I will give you an idea on how long it currently is. So for the TSS 482, it's now running at 4 months to 5 months. For the ENS, it's currently running from 6 months to 9 months. For the 494, it's not currently published. Maybe there's not a lot who have applied for this visa, and it's a very new visa as well. We hope that the 494 has better processing times than the TSS 482 and as compared to the 186 as well. This video was meant to just give you an overview of what's available, sponsorship pathways, the costs. Now, if you want a specific advice based on your circumstance, based on the person that you'd like to nominate, based on your company's requirements, it would be best that you book in a consultation with me so that I can discuss the different options with you and explain the criteria that would apply to you. I hope you enjoyed this video about employer sponsorships, and I hope that I've given you enough information for you to review whether this is a pathway that you'd like to go through with your potential employee. Thank you. If you want to check if you're eligible to migrate in Australia, please visit our website www.bridgeaus.com.au for a free initial assessment.